Let us get down to it. If you will eat a meal off my dead body, I'll give you everything. This house, my money, it will all be yours.
Take on all sins you carry, and I pawn my own soul.
I actually ate his sins? Hands up!
At the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to a poor boy named Rick, who lives with his ill mother. He brings her food and medicine, but finds her reciting Bible verses. As she turns toward him, Rick is shocked to see a gun in her hand, and before he can comprehend what's happening, she apologizes and then shoots herself. 3 years later, Rick decides to return to construction work as a laborer, but the supervisor informs him that someone else has already taken his place. Rick pleads that he needs the job, and just then, Rick's friend Jeremy tells the supervisor that he doesn't think they will get through the day without him. Rick accidentally injures himself while working, and noticing a woman nearby, he approaches her and asks for a first aid kit. The woman, Antoinette, replies with a no, to which Rick explains if he doesn't clean this up, it's going to get infected, and he'd really love to get back to work for her. She allows him inside and provides him with the first aid. A servant whispers something in her ear, and Antoinette then turns to Rick and asks, "Can I trust you to show yourself out?" As Rick is leaving, he spots some money in a room and decides to steal it. He enters the room, takes out a bill, and is about to leave when he encounters an old man named Drayton, who asks, "Who are you?" Rick introduces himself, and Drayton asks if he's hungry. Just then, Antoinette comes there asking, "What are you doing in here?" She immediately fires Rick, telling him to stay put while she calls the police. Rick admits he made a mistake and pleads with her not to call the police, suggesting she dock his pay or something instead. But the woman says she'll make sure no one ever hires him again. Before the situation escalates, Drayton intervenes and calmly asks Rick to sit down. As Rick sits down, Drayton asks, why didn't he take the whole stack? To which Rick explains that he got robbed on his way to work this morning, so he just took enough to make it back home. He was planning to pay it back when he got paid at the end of the week. Drayton, after a moment of thought, tells Rick he's not going to fire him. Instead, he hands Rick some money, saying, "Call it an advance." Later, we learn that Rick lives with Jeremy in Jeremy's apartment. Jeremy asks him, what would he do if he woke up a millionaire? To which Rick thinks for a moment and replies that he'd live in Lincoln Park, dine at restaurants where they charge $500 a meal, and give Tanya the greatest night of her life. Jeremy says he'd have unlimited money, and the first thing he'd do is get dinner and a drink. He then tells Rick that's his problem, that he got no follow-through, and that's why things didn't work out with him and Tanya. The next day, Antoinette approaches Rick and tells him that Mr. Drayton would like a word. Rick meets with Drayton, who says he doesn't have much time left, and when he is gone, all of this will be passed on to no one. He says he has no children or grandchildren, and that's the one regret he carries in a lifetime filled with many. Drayton asks Rick if he's religious, and when Rick says he used to be, Drayton admits he's lost his faith too, but finds comfort in religion as he nears death. He then makes a shocking offer that if Rick eats a meal from his dead body, he would inherit his house, money, and life's work. Rick, taken aback, asks if Drayton is joking, but Drayton insists he isn't. Rick says he won't do anything like that, to which Drayton asks why not, saying with one meal, he will have everything and will never have to worry about anything again, even something as trivial as bus fare. Drayton acknowledges that he might think he's just a crazy rich guy making one last jab at the less fortunate, but he insists it's a genuine offer. When Rick asks why he chose him, Drayton explains that he seems to be in need and appears to have the constitution to handle the stresses of immense wealth. That night, when Rick returns home, he discovers that Jeremy is throwing a party in their apartment. He is surprised to see Tanya there, and she asks him what he has been up to. Just as Rick is about to start a conversation, Jeremy walks over and jokingly begins to insult Rick. Later, Rick sits outside the house when Tanya joins him and tells him she never really thought he would stick around after what happened with his mom. Just then, they hear Jeremy yelling, and when Rick goes inside to calm him down, Jeremy shoves him and asks if he's kidding him after everything he's done for him. Tanya helps Rick to his feet, while Jeremy continues, saying that if he has a problem, he can leave, but then adds that he can't since he's sleeping on his floor. Rick goes to his room and gazes at the gun, thinking of ending his life like his mother did, but ultimately, he places it on the table. He then makes several calls to look for a job, but he receives negative responses everywhere. After a while, a man arrives looking for Rick and informs him that his presence is requested this evening. Rick checks the envelope and discovers that Drayton has died. The man then hands him a suit, saying he will be waiting for him by the car. Rick arrives at Drayton's house, where Antoinette greets him, and when he asks when Drayton passed, she says it was this morning. She urges him to review the legally binding contract, which states that in exchange for eating a meal from Drayton's corpse, he would become the heir to Drayton's fortune, but he must consume every part of the meal. Antoinette points out a disclosure agreement, emphasizing that no one outside their group and the estate employees should know about this transaction, and if he violates this clause, he will lose everything. Rick approaches Drayton's corpse and expresses his doubts, saying he doesn't think he can go through with it. Antoinette reminds him that Drayton drafted the contract himself before he died, so it can't be amended, and if he refuses, the estate will simply be liquidated. Rick agrees to go through with it, and afterward, one servant sets a drink on the table, while another places a plate of food on top of Drayton's corpse, and then walks away. Rick begins to eat, and as he finishes one dish, the servant places another on top of Drayton's corpse. He manages to eat all the dishes, but then the servant serves his leftover food directly onto Drayton's chest, and Antoinette reminds him that he must finish every last crumb. Somehow, Rick manages to eat it all, and Antoinette tells him that Drayton requested he read a statement aloud to conclude the meal. Rick picks up the card and reads, "For your peace, I take on all sins you carry and I pawn my own soul." He then signs the contract and leaves. He rushes to his bedroom and collapses onto the bed, but soon finds himself submerged in water, surrounded by numerous demonic figures, and the scene ends with his screams. The next day, when Rick comes downstairs, he spots a man in the house who suddenly runs away. Rick chases after him, but Antoinette appears, saying he is up earlier than expected, especially after such an ordeal. She adds that she's sure he is eager to explore the grounds in full. She tells him that the serving staff has explicit instructions never to make eye contact, assuring him it won't happen again. Antoinette explains that all of this now belongs to him, so he can fire the entire staff and start fresh if he desires. When Rick declines, she asks what he wants to do instead. He admits he doesn't know, so she suggests they start by outfitting his new home to suit his personal style, beginning with the bedroom. Rick agrees and asks if he could pick up the rest of his things at some point, to which Antoinette responds that they could have it couriered over without any issue. Rick then asks if he could just take one of the cars, to which she replies that he will quickly learn that the rich don't drive themselves unless it's for entertainment. Antoinette then hands him a card, saying it has no limits, and encourages him to take it out for a spend, suggesting he could buy a lot with that. Rick visits Jeremy's apartment to get his stuff and tries to give him some cash, but Jeremy declines, saying he'll be fine. He then asks if Rick wants to hang out for a bit, but Rick says he can't, to which Jeremy says that's fine, as he is sure he has a lot of adjusting to do still. As Rick is leaving Jeremy's apartment, Tanya arrives and asks Rick if he won the lotto or something. Rick replies, "It's actually better," to which she asks him to be straight with her. Rick assures her that it's legit and that he's back to being the Rick she used to know. She asks if he's sure he's doing okay, and Rick says he's great, suggesting they go get drinks like old times. But Tanya hesitates and says she can't, mentioning that she has to go because Jeremy is waiting on her. Rick goes to a club and asks for a whiskey that's not for sale, to which the bartender suggests a bottle of Macallan 64 or a Yamazaki 55. A man sitting nearby says he knows exactly what he would love, to which Rick says he is always up for a recommendation. The man signals to the bartender, who opens a can of beer and places it in front of Rick. The man starts laughing, mocking Rick, to which Rick tells the bartender that he'll take 2 bottles of Macallan, one for himself and one for the gentleman. Later, when Rick returns home and starts drinking the whiskey, a woman suddenly appears there. He notices his nose is bleeding, and as he looks around, the woman vanishes. However, before he can comprehend what's happening, she suddenly attacks him, screaming, "Why did you do this to me?" In the next moment, Rick finds himself submerged underwater, with the woman's screams, prompting him to jolt awake, drenched in water, lying on the floor, disoriented and terrified. Rick rushes downstairs and confronts Antoinette, asking if she drugged him. He frantically tells her about the soaking wet dead woman who attacked him and took him under. Antoinette tells him to calm down, and Rick, frustrated, demands to know what's happening to him. Antoinette says she doesn't understand his meaning, to which Rick asks her about the statement he read at the end of the meal and where it is now. Antoinette presents him with the note, and as he reads it again, he realizes what he's done. Shocked, he asks if it's even possible, to which Antoinette explains that after learning he was dying, Drayton became obsessed with unorthodox religious customs, seeking to escape what he believed was his fate. Rick asks what fate, to which she says hell. Rick grabs a book, reading that in the 1700s and 1800s in England and Wales, families would hire a peasant to eat a meal off a deceased's corpse, transferring the dead person's sins to the one who ate the meal until their own death. Rick asks if he's now a sin-eater, to which Antoinette confirms that the ritual he performed was exactly that. She adds that regardless of Drayton's beliefs, the simple truth is he inherited all of this for a price. She adds that extreme wealth comes with a burden, and this is the one he signed up for. Distressed, Rick says he needs to fix this, mentioning that the woman tried to kill him. He rushes out of the house and tells the driver to take him somewhere. Antoinette urges him to stay calm and suggests they work it out together inside, but Rick drives away. Rick goes to the church to confess, saying he knows what to say, but he doesn't even know what his sins are. The father asks what he means, to which Rick responds by asking if he can just give him some form of general absolution. The father explains that he can't buy his way out of it, emphasizing that confession is about seeking forgiveness for wrongdoing that one acknowledges. He cannot forgive him for something if he doesn't admit to what he did in the first place. Rick returns home and asks the servants if they know anything about Drayton hurting someone, but they all avoid eye contact and start to walk away. Antoinette arrives, and Rick says out of everyone there, she must know something about what happened. She asks him what exactly he would like to know, and he replies that he wants to know everything. He then asks her if she likes this job, to which she replies that it's her life, and Rick tells her that if she wants to keep this job, she should tell him everything he wants to know. Antoinette shows him the coroner's report, photos, interviews conducted by the Chicago police, and Drayton's recorded statement. After she leaves, Rick plays the tape and reviews the reports. He learns that Drayton was a suspect in the murder of his wife, Susan, who was having an affair with someone. However, Drayton claimed he did not kill her, and Rick is shocked to discover that it was actually Susan who attacked him. Rick returns to the church and confesses to killing Susan. The father asks, what did this woman ever do to him that led him to commit such an unspeakable act? To which Rick responds, he doesn't know, but all he knows is that he is sorry, and he'd do anything to take it back. The father begins reciting prayers, and suddenly, Susan's spirit appears, attempting to strangle Rick. However, as the father absolves Rick of his sins, Susan vanishes. The next day, Rick gets a call from Tanya, who asks if he has talked to Jeremy lately, as Jeremy has been acting really paranoid. She says something feels off, but he won't open up to her, but she thinks maybe he will listen to him, as she worries he might be in trouble. That night, while Rick is watching TV, we see a figure standing by the couch. After a moment, a table lamp falls, distracting him, and when he looks around, he sees a rope on the floor. Perplexed, he gets up to check it, and as he follows the rope, he is terrified to see a man there with his face covered by a mask. As the masked man approaches, Rick becomes panicked and falls. He manages to get up and rushes upstairs, looking for Antoinette, but gets no answer. Just then, he notices another spirit of a child approaching him, but at that moment, Antoinette arrives, asking if he is calling for her. Rick tries to tell her what just happened, but finds himself unable to speak. Antoinette reveals that Drayton was not born into any real wealth, but he himself was a sin-eater, and that's how he made money to get started. She explains that those desperate enough to employ a sin eater have usually committed terrible, unthinkable acts themselves. Rick asks if that means he could be carrying even more sins, to which Antoinette replies that it is as if he had committed them himself. She continues, saying that whatever is left over, whether they are called ghosts or energies of the victims, will not allow their murderers or rapists to rest. They will torment him as long as he carries that burden. Over the years, Drayden became overwrought, afraid and reclusive, and began to see the same things Rick did, and it eventually caught up with him. When Rick asks if sins killed Drayden, Antoinette replies that he took his own life, believing he could do so with impunity, thinking Rick would bear the burden of his suicide. Rick asks how he can get rid of sins he doesn't even know about, to which Antoinette suggests that he should learn to live with them, just as Drayton and every sin eater before him has done. Rick insists he can't, to which she explains that to rid himself of the sins, he must die and pass them along. He can choose to do that, or he can die with the sins on his head and likely be tortured for all eternity. As a friend, she advises him to enjoy the wealth, to live and spend as much as he can, and in the meantime, she suggests that maybe these pills will help. She assures him that she can find anything he needs to cope with the pain, to which Rick says she can't help him and leaves there. He goes to the church for help and asks the father to let him in, but the father tells him to go home. That night, unable to sleep, Rick takes some pills, but we see a ghost standing near his bed. He becomes terrified when he notices the ghost, but it disappears as he gets up. Moments later, it appears again, before vanishing again. Rick lies back down, but is horrified to see the ghost above him, and in an attempt to escape from it, he falls from the bed. He starts foaming at the mouth, and just then, Antoinette arrives. But Rick finds himself in a different world, where her mother asks is that him? Rick starts looking for his mother, and after a while, he sees her in front of him. However, as he approaches her, Dr. Kildare brings him back to his senses. Rick asks him, did he die? To which Kildare says for the briefest of moments, yes, but they pulled him through. After Kildare leaves, Rick says that she mentioned the only way to get rid of the sins is to die and pass them along. Antoinette replies that this is essentially true, to which he responds that he wants to try something. She says she has never been one to trust loopholes, but this could work, and she is sure Drayton never thought of it. She offers to help him, but asks if he is truly willing to let it all go, to which he says yes. She then asks if he has someone in mind to pass it on to, and he responds, no, before asking if she would take it. He suggests that she could stop serving and finally have some control, to which Antoinette expresses her fear that her contract doesn't allow for it, and he replies that it ultimately comes down to him, or someone like him, admitting that he can't do it. Antoinette suggests Jeremy's name, to which Rick replies that he has known him his whole life and can't do this to him. Antoinette explains that she means someone so desperate to believe his own lies that he would resort to theft and violence. Rick becomes scared when he sees the ghost behind Antoinette and pleads with her to trust him, saying that Jeremy can't be the one. As he gets up to go inside, he receives a call from Jeremy, who tells him he is in serious trouble and needs cash, or some guys will hurt him. Rick arrives at Jeremy's house with the cash, but finds everything in disarray. He heads to his room to retrieve his gun, and when he comes out, he encounters a ghost who asks for his help. In a panic, Rick shoots him, only to realize she is Tanya, leaving him shocked by what he has done. The driver rushes in to take him away from the scene, leaving Tanya's lifeless body behind. The driver brings Rick home and hands him over to Antoinette, who reassures him that this will all be taken care of. Rick says he just wants it to stop, to which she says then he knows what needs to be done. Rick decides to pass the curse to Jeremy and calls him over. Jeremy tells him that Tanya is dead, explaining he begged for more time, but they broke into his house and shot her. He believes that if he had been there, he could have prevented it. Antoinette remarks on the heavy burden Jeremy carries, and he admits he's unsure of what to do next. He insists he won't go back and suggests he could work for Rick. Antoinette reveals that Rick wants him to be his sin eater, explaining that he must consume a meal off Rick's dead body, eating every last crumb, in exchange for everything. Shocked, Jeremy asks Rick if he's dying, and Antoinette explains that Rick feels this life doesn't suit him, and he believes that with his military background, Jeremy might better handle the pressures of wealth. Next, Rick lies on the table as Dr. Kildare stands beside him, and Antoinette reassures Rick, saying it will work. And this is their best option. Kildare informs Rick that he can only allow 4 minutes for the process, but it should be enough time for Jeremy to finish the meal. Antoinette brings Jeremy to Rick's side and tells him that the ritual must remain a secret. She warns him that if he chooses to violate this clause, he will lose everything. Kildare then gives Rick a lethal injection, causing his heart to stop, and he finds himself in another world, where he encounters all the ghosts he had seen before, and they all ask him for help. After a while, he spots his mother and starts moving toward her, but as he gets closer, he realizes she is actually Tanya. They both begin to apologize to each other before Tanya disappears, and immediately after, all the ghosts turn on Rick. However, after some time, the spirit of Rick's mother arrives, causing all the ghosts to retreat. Meanwhile, the ritual is complete, and when Rick regains consciousness, he asks if he died. Antoinette tells him that Jeremy finished the meal in its entirety, and the prayer, and he has already begun giving orders as if he were born to it. She then asks Rick if he sees anyone else skulking around, to which he looks around and says no. Antoinette then informs him that Jeremy has already started enjoying his new life, and she hopes he will do the same. 6 months later, we see Rick working as a construction worker, while Antoinette writes Jeremy's name in a book that lists all the sin eaters before him. It is then revealed that Jeremy is now haunted by the ghosts, and Antoinette emerges from the structure on which Jeremy and Rick were working. As Antoinette returns to the house, Jeremy's screams echo through it, and we see Antoinette's eyes flash. Meanwhile, Tanya's ghost sits next to Rick, and the movie ends here. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a scare. Until next time, stay spooky.